So what I wanted to do now is go back to that list of questions, open up an ACL data file, and just kind of one by one knocking off as many of these as I can in a time frame. And once we're done with almost every one, if not all of these, what we'll then do is basically go through some more complex ones. So the ones we're going to do later are the unique and repetitive journal entry one, the stratification, which we'll do differently, and bear with me, and then the next one is the extract journal entry with key text in there as well. So what we'll do is first off go through kind of these who and what and where, and then why, and we'll have a polling question probably in the middle there, just to kind of break it up a little bit. Okay, so I have a couple of general ledger files. They're not the best data files, I will admit that, but it's kind of hard to give out actual general ledger files. But this one has 110,000 records in it, so that's kind of good. We can play around with that one a little bit more than normal. The only problem is I don't have a date on this one. So one way that we could do this right now and kind of show you something is to add a date. And we'll kind of give this a whirl here. If I go to the table layout, we can add date, and in the default value here, what I'll do is I'll just put in 2000, let's say 2011 and 0101. Have a different, sorry about that, can't type here. And that'll be kind of a default date, and then we'll set a condition here that basically says if the record number is less than 55,000, because that's kind of halfway through the file, the value will, in that case, be 2012 or 101. And just giving us a little bit of a date range to work with. Nothing too, hopefully that worked. Let's give that a try if my logic worked okay. So anything less than is 2012, anything more than 55,000 is 2011. Great. Okay. So now that I have that, we can do a little bit more kind of time testing, which probably will be useful for some of the work that we're doing. And okay, so let's continue on here. One of the first tests I had was summarizing items by enterer of the actual general ledger journal entry. Because I can't show you that, I want to just show you the summarization on a different field. In this case, I'm just going to take the journal entry number, and we'll accumulate based on debit and credit. So just a good old summarize command. We can do JESUM, and what that'll do is create a file called JESUM that has each journal entry summarized with the debit and credit detail posted there as well. Okay, so then that kind of answers how to do more of a summary for those that had any questions about that. The next one we had was the repetitive one entry, but from another report that also may play into this is taking a look from manual journal entries. All that would be is either extracting out or summarizing, kind of like the summarization we did here, if a certain type is set to manual. So if, a lot of times manual journal entries are called spreadsheet because people upload a spreadsheet, so there'll be a type here called spreadsheet. I don't have this in my data, but just trying to give you some idea of how to do that one. The stratifying we're going to skip over because we're going to do that in a little bit. But now, let's say we wanted to summarize on the amount field. So right now I have a debit and a credit field. And actually the combination, it's either debit has value and then the credit is 0 or vice versa. What we can do is really try to create a calculated field for that that puts it into one section. But also I need to create a calculated field because ACL doesn't like to summarize things on amount fields. So basically numeric fields. So we have to kind of turn it into a character field anyway. So I'm going to call it Benford invoice amount, and maybe it's not so much a Benford, but let's give it a try here. And what I'll do is I will say in this case, we're either going to create a string of the GL credit amount, and just bear with me one second, I just have to check my settings, which I think I can actually do right here. Good. So we're going to create a string of the GL credit amount, comma, in this case we'll make it 16 characters of a field, and I'm going to alt trim that, really just to basically bring that all the way over to the left. I'm going to copy that section, so we're just alt trimming the GL credit amount, but then we're going to say down here, if the GL credit amount equals 0, oops, then what we'll do in the value section, instead of making it the credit amount, we're going to make it the debit amount, because it was either debit 0 or credit 0. So that is a way to create a string version of each of those fields. And let's add that right here, and we'll call it Benford GL amount. So I've done a couple of things there. I mean, I've combined it into one field, but I've also created a string version of that field. And note, we still have the debit and credit, so it still kind of works out. I can then, I guess I could perform a Benford's analysis on the actual data, but I really want to summarize on that Benford GL amount, accumulate the debit and credit, and we'll just do this to a file called Benford amount sum. Okay, so now we have, out of the total population that we had before, we now have, and we know that we have 51,273 values. What's kind of interesting about this, and let's kind of blow this up just a little bit if I can. Maybe make that 12 font for everybody, is we can start to take a look at, again, out of 55, well, let's take the total count, I think was about 110,000. So we have 110,000 items. I could calculate a percentage over here and show you how to do that, so maybe we'll do that, but it's just kind of interesting to look at the amounts. The only difference or problem is they're not sorted in a high to low fashion. So normally what I'll do is kind of just right-click and say sort ascending, or better, sort descending. What's interesting, obviously, is the zeros that are showing up in this, be it in the debit or credit detail, is kind of interesting, and that truly is, there are zeros on kind of both sides of that coin there. Don't know why those entries are showing up, but then $500 or pounds or whatever it is shows up as well. 150 shows up, so you can see some of the larger items. What I like to do is find that break where, and there's other ways of doing this a lot more methodical than I am right now, but let's just say right here it breaks, and from this point forward, so from 19,774, there are some duplication of amounts that are showing up in the actual data itself, and it just might be, in this case, one debit and one credit that is showing up that's leading to that 99,000, which does make some sense as you look at the totals here. But down here you can start to see all of the ones that are showing up. And what you could do is filter to the ones. So here's a kind of a neat little test. And in this case, I don't think this is going to work too well for me. That didn't work too bad, but probably my only fear of doing this is because it's a text-based item. I never know if it's going to sort it right. So let me sort descending. Yes, it never really does. So that starts to put some of the larger one-time credits that are showing up in your data, which is kind of interesting. Why did we have $60 million posted once as a credit, and there is no debit accordingly? Like, it's not like they put it in and reversed it. Oh gosh, maybe there was. Sorry. So the debit amount here also is the 60, but I don't know if it was actually. I think it was a little bit different, but I could be. Let me just copy that. Yeah, it was off by 30 cents, so there was a difference. I mean, if it was the same amount, you would see it on both lines, But in this case, you can see this one is off by 30 cents, and the other one was not. Don't know why 30 cents on $600 million mattered, but I guess it did to somebody. So again, this gives you an idea of looking at some of the larger one-time debits and credits. What I would, take a look for, it's not so bad to have where, again, you have a debit and credit offsetting one another. That's so what, one of those. But in this case, I more or less am looking for items that are, let's say, greater than 50. And let's just do a count of that. How many are greater than 50? Wow, strangely, there's 50. But that's just a strange synchronicity there, where there are 50 items where the count is greater than 50 in the data itself. But again, taking a look here, just from a descending point of view, you can start to look for this. So as you could probably tell, I spend a decent amount of time on the amount calculations, because I find it's very interesting, especially some of these one-time credit amounts that you might have, as well as taking a look for ones that are showing up dramatically a lot, 200 times that certain values are showing up, and then working from there. Okay, so that one is spending some time there summarizing by the amount field itself. Now, from a scatter graph point of view, what does scatter graphing mean? This can be something that we can do somewhat quickly, but you do need to jump into Excel for it. So if I take this file and I summarize it, let me just make sure I get this right here. Let's summarize this by account number. And we basically, let's take a look right now at maybe just the debits themselves in this scenario. What you could then do is put the date field as more, I apologize, I picked the wrong command. I want to cross-tabulate. So based on the cross-tabulation, see, I can't cross-tabulate on a date, so that's a little bothersome. So we're going to have to edit that field. But what you can do, I think, more quickly than creating two summaries and joining them back together and doing all this analysis, we can take that date field and let's just kind of go in here and notice we have that add date field here. What I'm going to do is just create a new one called add date character, and that is going to be the date function of the add date field. And that's just the character rendition of it. And let's add that over here. And because I only know there's like 2 of them, it's not that hard to do this. So then let's give this a whirl here. We'll cross-tabulate on the add date character, journal entry account number. I mean, I guess I could do the debits and credits as one, but let me just do the debit amounts first, and I'm going to include the count, and I'm just going to do this to a scatter debits. Okay, so now what I have is for all debit amounts, I can start to look at the volumes and values for 2011 and 2012. If I took this and quickly exported this to Excel, account number, maybe put the counts together and put the amounts together in my export, and we'll just export that. Okay. And now that I'll open up that file in Excel. What you can do is create a differential. So let's just take the debits on their own, and then we could call this difference, and let's call this difference count. And this one is going to be difference, say, value. So what I can do is say, I mean, first off, it's interesting that we have an account number of blank. That's always interesting. But let's take 2012 minus 2011. And we'll copy that all the way down. Now, again, I could do this in ACL. It's a little bit easier once we're in Excel, which we had to go to anyway, to just kind of make a difference column of the values, 2012 to 11, and then the volumes, 2012 to 11. Now I can highlight all of those differences. So now that I have them by account number, and I can insert a scatter graph. And it's just going to put that here. I'm going to right-click on that scatter and move the chart to its own spreadsheet or worksheet. So now that I have that, very quickly, you start to see items that, again, let's just go back. This is kind of the power of graphing that we talked about, where you can see trends that are kind of hard to see when you're just looking at this mess of data. Like, yeah, the 120 and the 130 and all that stuff looks kind of big. I could sort this data. Here's a 209, 539. That looks the worst, or more different, et cetera, et cetera. So now that I go to my chart, though, I can very quickly say, oh, here's the 120, here's the 209, and these items jump out like a sore thumb. But you can also start to see the values and volumes that are decreasing. What I find interesting is, for our quick example here, that everything is on the increase versus decrease, which is kind of interesting. But again, you can start to pinpoint maybe about 20 or so items, and you can see them right. If you can see my mouse, you should be able to see this, that allow you to very quickly get a sense of the major change between this year and last year by account and account activity. So that just took a couple minutes. You could do that for the credits as well. What I find really interesting is if you do a debits graph and then a credits graph, and you could almost like lay them on top of one another, but I usually will just kind of scroll back and forth between the debits chart and the credits chart. You'll notice that a lot of these values are the same, and it's sort of the same accounts are having a lot more debit and credit activity. But again, it's just very interesting test. Now we're back to the when and where testing, and how we're going to go through right now and go over some of the weekend and holidays. Then also journal entries related to the prior year, and taking a look at dates there. Journal entry credits by month, day, and year. We've kind of done that, but we will show you how to do that in a stratification graph that's coming up. Extracting journal entries made to suspense accounts. That's something where, again, usually can get a list of those and work off of that list. Extracting journal entries to accounts that are problematic. And then last but not least, the debits and revenue, and taking a look at types of accounts. So kind of a when and where that we're going to take a look at here and show you in ACL how you can run some of these tests. Okay, so what we're going to continue and do is talk through these other areas. And from a when point of view, let me just open up my journal of detail again. I find, there's a few different ways to do this. I do find it's kind of interesting. You can summarize on a date, but so that's one thing that you can do. But summarizing on an amount is not allowed. But a date you can, so you don't have to set up this character version of the date. Sometimes it is useful to do that. We're going to talk a little bit later on how to exactly do that with a function. Or a computed field in ACL, but what I'm kind of looking for right now is really just to be able to do that summary. And the reason I find it's kind of useful to summarize on, say, the date field and get your debits and credits, and just do this to more of a date. Maybe I'll even call it a day sum, because I'm summarizing on every day. Now again, we only had 2 of them in there, but when I go to my table layout, when you look at this date that we just summarized, it is still a date, but it has been converted to a year, month, day format. And it just seems like whenever ACL summarizes it, it puts it into a format that's just a lot easier to work with. What you could do is highlight those first 4 digits and say that it's ASCII, and you could call this the year field. And then what you could do is highlight, these 2012-01, month, day, year. So just these, I believe, is the month, the next 2 in that progression there. And we'll call this the month field. And now we have a month and year field that's been added. That, even though I know it's a lot harder to see it here, but then once you, because we only have 2 dates, we could add the month and year to this, and it is something where you're able to, whoops, now I'm just a little confused about why that's not coming through exactly. Huh. And I set them up as ASCII. It's kind of odd. All right. Well, oh, and I know why, because I think I need to set them up as Unicode. So that might be my reasoning why. I am working on the Unicode version of ACL, which is a little bit trickier at times, and just doing this right now. But I believe because I'm in Unicode that you need to set it as Unicode, but that would be just my guess, and guessed right there. But for most of you, it would be ASCII that you would set that up as. Once you have those fields set up, these are now character renditions of the original date field, and now these can be summarized on in a month and year fashion. So usually what I'm doing if I'm just playing around with the ACL file is I will do more of a day sum to get to that daily summary, then create my month and year field that we just talked about, and then define it as either ASCII or Unicode. If you're using the Unicode version, you kind of have to go the Unicode route in that analysis. But that, I have to say that that kind of covers a lot of the actual, summaries by month and year and day, and all of that you could get. But if you graph this data, especially in a daily format, it's really remarkable what you can find, and how that scatter graph before showed how some things popped out. This even more so, shows you how things will pop out of the general ledger. Okay, so taking a look back at this journal detail file, extracting items that were just before prior year end. I mean, for the most part, you can do a filter, a function where you're filtering based on a date and saying, if the add date is greater than, or is less than, and then you could select whatever date you want using this date function with an ACL. So this date here, you could add whatever date, and that will work you through kind of items that are right before a period year end or right after year end. The weekends and holidays, that one's a little more tricky, and what you can do is in your table layout, you could add a computed field. You could call it day of week, and in ACL you have a DOW or DOW, one, and we can actually change that and put the add date field in there. So now we have a day of week of the add date field, and let's now go here. So, oops. All right, so now that I've added that field here, it is a numeric field that calculates, and it's a numeric 1 through 7. And what's kind of interesting is because I guess January 1st, 2012 was a Sunday, and remarkably January 1, 2011 was the day before. It tends to happen that way because of the odd number of days, and maybe a leap year in there or something. That was basically the Saturday. So 1 is a Sunday, 7 is a Saturday, and everything else in between is in between. Now, I can't really summarize on this field, right? I mean, if I try to summarize on the day of week field, again, you can't summarize on a number, so you do have to go in, and if you want to summarize on the day of week, you could do one of two things. You could go back into this one that you just had, create a string field, and, I don't know, I could kind of create a 12-character field, let's just say. So it's a 12-character string field. And now that day of a week is more of a string, I can now classify on the day of week and see how many happened on each day. And again, this is really interesting. You might even want to cross-tabulate, and I know I don't have the data for this, but you could cross-tabulate where you're selecting maybe a journal entry number or an account number, or maybe who entered it. The who part is really interesting here. And then you could add the day of week to the columns, so you'll basically have, like 1 through 7 as your columns across the top. So let's just do this on account number, just for fun here. and we'll just do the credit amounts and include the count, and we'll just do this called day of week cross. And now I have, for each day of week that we had in the data, a summary of how much was posted to every account. So you might want to take a look at large postings, large dollar postings on weekends, but this gives you a nice summary. And I like to summarize this one by who entered it, because you can get a trend there of people that are coming in a lot or doing most of their activity on a weekend versus a weekday. Okay, continuing onward into the where exercise, having accounts such as, let me just go back to this one here, having general ledger account numbers that are suspense related or revenue related, or a lot of this you have to find out from your accounting department. So you're going to have to ask, where are the suspense accounts? Do the accounts start with a number 9 as an example, or what? What is the logic? And with revenue accounts, sometimes there are 4, sometimes there are 5, meaning that that's what they start with. Balance sheet accounts start with a 1 and a 2 and a 3 for assets and liabilities and equity in most systems, but don't take this as the norm. I would definitely ask. And a lot of that is really just then taking a look at extracting if the general ledger account number starts with that particular digit. So I mean, a nice way to kind of bring it out is just to call it like GL account first digit. And what you want to do is take that account number field. I like to all trim it just to kind of bring everything over to the left, and then you could sub-function it for 1 character. So it's basically the sub-function starts at 1 and goes for 1 across, and that gives you a first digit of that account number. So a lot of times what I'll do is I will basically create the summary real quick and classify it and go to accounting and say, okay, I have GL account numbers with a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Which one is the revenue? Which one is the expense? Etc. Where are suspense accounts? They may start with a 0, for example. But that's something where I think just doing that summary and then going to accounting and getting their feedback can give you a lot of information about how to extract journal entries that are either problematic or suspense related or related to revenue or what have you. So a lot of different items there. And I think, for the most part, I think that kind of covers a lot of what I wanted to talk through. Oh, actually, no, I do have one more set. Let me just go back to my slides here, and we'll talk about some of the why reports that you could run. And we'll talk about, exceeding an average is a good one, round multiples. We're going to skip over that one about the plug and net to 0 because we're going to do that in a few minutes. Okay, so what I, like to take a look at are, how do you create, let me just go back to my journal detail file here, and let's just summarize this journal detail file based on account number. And we'll summarize, say, the debits and the credits in there. And we'll create this output file called GL account sum, if I don't have one of those already. Okay, so now we have the summary of the debits and credits with account. One thing that you can do, and this isn't that hard to do, is go back to your table layout. And in this case, we're going to create a calculated field, which maybe we'll just call it in this case, average debit. Another way you could do it is we could just call it average debit credit, and this would be both. What we would then, in this case, you could either kind of add the two together, add the debits and the credits, so we could do this. We could take the debit amount plus the credit amount. So that's the average debit and credit. And then we could divide that by the particular count. And the count field was provided. You can decide if you'd like to. I mean, a lot of times I'll add, maybe have this go out to like 3 decimal places. So I'll multiply both the numerator and denominator by the 3-digit item there. And that gives us like an average debit or credit value. Now that you have that value, it's really not that hard. Again, it's more of like a simple averaging of everything that might be in there. You might want to just do it on the debits and the credits separately, but this isn't a terrible way of doing it either. Then what you could do is, going back to the journal detail file, you can then join based on account number to that GL account sum. So we could join on the account number here, and then bring over that average debit and credit amount. And when that, I guess we just do this real quickly here. Just bring this over. I'm going to include all primary just in case, but we'll just call this join for right now. It's just a simple test, and really then just showing you in as quick as we can, kind of for each account that is showing up here. This is account 1. What is the average debit and credit added together, divided by the total count, and how do these debits and credits relate to that? And in most cases, a lot of them are, the average is actually, pretty good. So you might want to take the average and multiply this average by like 3. So you could create a new field and say, average by 3, and in my default value here, what I can do is take the average debit credit, multiply by 3, and away we go. So these are ways to kind of use a average amount in relation to your current values, and just find certain values in each account that look strange. You might want to try doing a standard deviation of each account, but that one's a little harder to do. I mean, it's something where you need to loop through and calculate for each account the standard deviation. So I'm going to skip over that one for right now. Let's go back to the journal detail file. Another thing that we were kind of looking at in some of the whys here is just taking this. I think actually, we created this already. It is called the GL sum table here, where we just summarize the debits and credits. Well, a really simple test that you could do is just say, where do the debits not equal the credits? Just curious. And okay, it's off by 2 pennies, by 1 penny, etc. Let's kind of change that then and say, okay, let's take the maybe the absolute value of the debits minus credits does not equal, and let's kind of put in here is, excuse me, the absolute value of the debit minus credits is greater than $1. So now we're looking at things that, excuse me, is greater than $1, and there's really nothing. So now let's say it's less than $1, and let's just do this one more time, and we'll put an AND statement. It's greater than 0. So we have all these items that have like $1 off, so 68, 70, etc. And from an account point of view, there's only probably about 293 out of the 11,000 journal entries, but it's all under $1. So we'll spot them $1. There's no sense in spending a lot of time on that, and we'll kind of move on to the next test. From a journal entry point of view, I guess you could pick either the debit or the credit field. One last thing that you might want to look at is the mod function. So the mod function will divide that amount by, and let's put in here, say 10,000. And if that mod of 10,000 equals 0.00, let's take a look at those items. Now, okay, I do have a 0 amount here. Why don't we quick filter and say and not equal to 0? So now I have every journal entry where the debit amount is around 10,000. So it's rounded to 10,000. There's only a few. There's probably about 20 or 30 entries where that is true, and that is a very small number in relation to everything. So again, that gives you a way of very quickly identifying the round items is really just to mod, comma 10,000 equal to 00, but excluding anything where it is already equal to 0, because ACL will kind of view that as also like a rounded by 10,000. I guess when it divides 0 by 10,000, it ends up with 0 because it's not a division by 0, but it's still 0 is the answer. So.